My mum had been a drug addict my entire life. When I was younger, she constantly had people coming and going, and it seemed that a majority of the time, these people were shady fuckers. What did I expect? I thought I'd share one experience that still bothers me quite a bit. I was about 12 years old at the time. I was sitting on the couch watching Drake and Josh, I think it was, when there came a knock at the door. My mum wasn't home at the time, so I decided to turn the TV off and remain quiet. "Eloy, you home?" It was a man. "I just wanted to drop something off. Eloy?" I stayed quiet. "Eloy, open the damn door. I'm not going to hurt you." At this point, I was scared. Even as a 12-year-old, when someone says they're not going to hurt you, there's generally something they did in the past that would prompt them to reassure someone of that, right? He started rattling the door handle. "I swear to God, I will break this damn door. You've been ignoring my calls, my texts. You cannot run from me." He began pounding and kicking at the door. I ran to the bathroom because it was the only door with a lock and hid in the bathtub with the curtain drawn. I decided to take my bath gun and put a little water in it as well as a bit of shampoo. At that point, I heard what sounded like splitting wood and then footsteps in my living room. I heard him go from room to room, all the while yelling, "Eloy, you can't ignore me now, you bitch." Finally, he came to the bathroom door and tried the handle. "Oh, so you're in here, huh?" More pounding. He kicked the door in and stood still for a few long moments before ripping open the curtain and peering down at me. He had slicked back black hair with piercing green eyes, a sad attempt at facial hair, black hooded sweatshirt, black jeans, black shoes. He held a brown bag in one of his tattoo-covered hands. "Oh, even better. I've seen you around before. You're Eloy's daughter. So sweet." He kept repeating that. It made my skin crawl. He walked over to the window and locked it before squatting next to me. "You're gonna come with me, okay? How about that? I'll buy you some ice cream." I glared at him, trying my best not to look terrified. "Not much of a talker? Your mother could learn something from you." He reached his hand out and rested it on my shoulder. In one quick motion, I pulled my squirt gun from under my leg and began spraying him in his face. He didn't register it at first, but quickly began wiping his eyes. "What the fuck is this? What the fuck?" I hurled my body at him, causing him to fall back and hit his head on the toilet. I grabbed the brown bag and ran from the bathroom out into the hallway and down the stairs. I then caught my mum on the entrance steps and pulled her to the other direction. "What's going on? You're making me drop things." I remembered a head of lettuce rolling away. She quickly caught on that something was terribly wrong and ran with me to my aunt's house. After catching my breath, I described the man and what he did. She quickly recognized him as a man named Tony, whom she owed a lot of money to. I then realized I was holding the brown paper bag that the man had and gave it to my mum. She found a gun inside. He had showed up to kill my mother. This happened about 3 years ago. I was attending the university in a nice small town in California. I lived just a couple of blocks away from campus. It was about a 10-minute walk, so I never bothered trying to find parking and just walked. I had a math class that ran from 6 to 9 at night on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I generally have no issues walking home even in the dark. I'm 6'3", around 200 pounds. I have a big red beard and I believe people are usually more afraid of me than I am of them. I should note that I am a total pansy and were anyone to attack me, I'd probably end up in the fetal position crying. About a week ago, before this particular night, the school sent out an email to all the students. There have been several instances of girls being stalked and, in a couple cases, attacked or taken by a group of 3 or 4 men in a black 4-door car. They warned us to walk in groups and not to stay out late. The attacks were all after dark. I remember reading the email and feeling horrible for the girls who had been attacked, but I also didn't pay it much mind as I didn't quite fit the attackers' criteria. While people had been able to count the number of assailants and describe the car, nobody ever got a license plate number. It was a very cold Thursday night.
I'd worn my large hooded jacket to keep warm on the walk. We had a test that day, which meant we'd get to leave class early. Our teacher would usually spend about 20 minutes going over stuff, then give us the test. After we finished and turned it in, we were allowed to leave. So, instead of all 30 or so people leaving class at once, we were all spread out in our departures. I was probably the 10th person also to finish the test, and I started on my walk back home. I threw on my big jacket and put the hood on. I love this jacket because it's incredibly warm and makes me look more bear-like. One of the people who finished the test before me was this fairly petite girl. We had sat next to each other several times, but I'm pretty socially awkward and had never spoken to her. She was walking about 30 yards ahead of me. It was around 8 PM and dark out. She was staring at her phone as she walked along. We'd been walking for a couple of minutes when I started noticing something that made me feel a bit off. There weren't streetlights along this stretch of road, so it was pretty dark. I could have sworn I saw something moving in the streets, but I wasn't sure. I began to pay closer attention, and after a few seconds, I realized there was a car moving slowly behind this girl. It was a black car, and they didn't have their lights on. It was almost impossible to see them. I immediately recalled the email I received the previous week about the attackers. Small girl, alone at night, black car. Holy shit. I sped up to start catching up with her. The car pulled closer as well. I called out to the girl. She stopped and turned around to look at me. As she turned, the car doors opened. I grabbed my phone and turned on my flashlight app. 3 men jumped out of the car and started running at her. I started yelling at them, and she started running away from me. They were about to catch her and I was sprinting at them. I am 100% sure 3 dudes would absolutely kick my ass. I'm sure 1 dude would. I had no idea what was going to happen if I caught up to them in time. I started shouting everything I could think of at the time, and then I deepened my voice to sound more intimidating. I puffed up my bear jacket to look as big as I could. I remembered that nobody had been able to get the plate numbers, so I shined my light at the car. I then started shouting out the license plate info at them. This freaked the attackers out. 2 of them ran back into the car. 1 guy turned to me and looked like he was going to come at me, but one of the guys in the car told him not to because I was too big. They flipped their lights on and sped off. I reached out to the girl to make sure she was okay. I shined my light on her to make sure she hadn't been cut or anything. She was crying and shaking. At this point, a couple of other people had finished their test and seen the encounter. Another guy from class and I walked the girl to her dorm. She even made us walk her to her door on the 3rd floor, even though access to the building required a car. We called the police and told them about the encounter. I had memorized the plate number on the car as I had shouted it at the guys a couple of times. A month or so later, they found the car. Inside were some knives, duct tape, mace, and rope. They caught 2 guys outright, and we're trying to get them to out the others involved. Every Tuesday and Thursday, even after the police caught the guys, I would walk the girl to her dorm after class, and then head home. It was one of the scariest moments of my life. I thought for a while that I was going to either watch this girl get kidnapped, or be brutally murdered trying to stop it. When I was young, my mother and I took the bus a lot because she didn't have a car. This incident happened during that stretch of time, more specifically when I was around age 5 or 6. We were at the closest bus stop to my house, which is situated right next to a fairly large tree. I remember it being a pretty nice afternoon, bright and breezy, and my mum was reading one of her paperback novels while I inspected the trunk of the tree for small lizards. I was really into animals back then, and I loved pretending I was tracking down dangerous critters like Steve Irwin. My search was proving to be kind of fruitless though, since I was making a lot of noise by stomping around, and I'm sure any lizards nearby had heard me and were already well hidden from the grasp of my chubby little hands. Nevertheless, I kept up the hunt and eventually, forgetting that I was supposed to stay within my mother's line of sight, went around to the other side of the tree to look. The bench Mum was sitting on was now out of view, and she likewise wouldn't have been able to see me if she looked up. She was quite absorbed into her book, however, and thus wouldn't be aware of what was going on until it was almost too late. As I scrabbled about on my hands and knees in the grass by the tree, I heard light footsteps coming up a ways behind me, and turned around to see a man making his way towards me. I don't remember much about how he looked, but I know he seemed very tall. The way the sun was facing placed most of his frame in the shadow of the tree, which gives my recollection of him a vaguely surreal quality. At the time though, he was just a man who was looking at me. He greeted me warmly as I stared up at him and asked me what I was doing outside all alone. I guess he hadn't seen my mother because of the tree and thought I was unsupervised. I'd always been a shy child, particularly around adults, so I didn't respond, choosing to continue looking at him. I was a little wary, but he didn't seem like a threat, and it was the middle of the afternoon. He seemed to take my silence as a confirmation of his assumption, because he followed up his previous question by telling me he was taking a walk, and started to tell me that I should join him to get some ice cream. He didn't wait for me to answer this time, but continued a gentle stream of words, saying he liked my dress and wanted to be my friend. As he was speaking, I noticed that he was slowly stepping closer and closer to me. I was beyond mere awareness at this point, and my mind was sliding towards something more akin to alarm. But I didn't know if I'd be able to run away from him before he could reach me. My family had always warned me not to go anywhere with strangers, and the serious concern in their faces when they told me had made me certain that following an unknown person was a very scary bad thing, even if I wasn't old enough to understand why at the time. When the man was within an arm's length of me, he reached out his hand and brushed the tips of his fingers against my shoulder. I will never forget that moment, how my bubble of personal space had been pressed inward and then pierced. Whatever spell of silence I had been under was immediately broken, and I screamed as loud as I could, twisting violently away from his hand. The man flinched then froze, seeming to calculate what his next move would be now that I was proving to be less of an easy target than he expected. His decision was made for him when my mum, jolted out of her reading by my cry, appeared from around the other side of the tree and spotted us. She screeched at him. I have never seen her that angry again in all my life, and he immediately spun to flee without a word. A shiny black car that I hadn't noticed before was parked on the other side of the road a pretty good distance away from us, and when the man reached it, he got into it quickly and sped off. He never paused to start it up, which means it must have been running the entire time it was sitting there. This small detail didn't mean much to my immature mind at the time, but remembering it now gives me chills. It's pretty obvious that he wasn't just some friendly guy on a stroll who happened upon a lonely child. He had spied me from the road, stopped his car, and left it running for a speedy getaway once he had snatched me up. I can only imagine where he truly would have taken me if I hadn't alerted my mum, or put up a fight.
Several years ago, I was working in retail as an assistant manager at a very popular men's and women's clothing store in a large upscale shopping mall. Most of the time, I had opening shifts and I came in very early to open the store alone, or occasionally with one other sales associate. I would sometimes get creeped out being in such a large store all alone, but the introvert in me preferred the quiet, slow morning shifts on weekends before the whirlwind of crazed afternoon shoppers. We communicated over headsets in the store, and one Friday morning, my sales associate Kate called to me over the headset. "You have a phone call." She explained that it was a customer I had helped earlier that morning who really liked the items I had sold him and wanted to thank me for the exceptional customer service. It hadn't been much busier than usual that morning, and I didn't remember sending anything in particular to a male customer. I figured maybe Kate misunderstood him, or maybe he was thinking of someone else. Either way, he asked for me by name, and I was delighted to take a phone call from a satisfied customer as opposed to an angry one. I walked up to the register and picked up the phone at the desk. "Hi, how can I help you?" "Is this Ashley?" a man's voice asked. "Yes, this is Ashley. How can I help you?" "Ashley with the red sweater and dark hair?" "That's me," I replied. Thanks to Mum and Dad for cursing me with an ultra-popular 80s baby name, people have to triple-check that they're talking to the right girl. "Oh, I'm so glad I got hold of you, Ashley," said the man on the line. Something about his voice was setting off tiny alarm bells somewhere in the back of my head. "I'm sorry, who's this again?" I asked. "Oh, this is Mark," he replied. "I just wanted to say thanks for helping me pick out that shirt earlier." I started racking my brain as he prattled on about how much he liked his outfit. I definitely don't remember a Mark with a shirt. I glanced down at the caller ID. Unknown.
And you're so friendly and beautiful.
Oh, Jesus, guy. Asking me out under the guise of a customer service call? I rolled my eyes and looked over at Kate, annoyed. She smiled, waiting for the little bit of customer gossip that would surely come her way after I hung up.
Thanks for the compliment, sir, but I have to go back to work now.
He cut me off.
You know, you have a perfect arse. I thought about it the whole way home. I jerked off thinking about it as soon as I walked into the door.
Mark proceeded to go into sickening detail about all the things he wanted to do to me. I didn't need to hear anything more. I slammed the receiver down, feeling sick. After telling Kate what had just transpired over the phone, I continued to go over the day's events in my mind. I definitely didn't remember anyone named Mark. But I was selling 100 shirts to 100 different guys every week. Mark could be any of them. Mark might not even be his real name. Soon enough, customer traffic picked up in the store, and more of my co-workers filtered in for their shifts. I told my manager and a few other co-workers about what had happened on the phone that morning. Although I was thoroughly disgusted by it, they helped me shrug it off. Just a one-off weirdo customer who would probably be too embarrassed to ever come in the store again. By the end of the day, I had forgotten all about Mark. Unfortunately, the phone calls didn't stop. Mark continued to call the store several times a week. He would give different names or start out with some made-up customer service issues, changing his voice at first to ensure he got me on the line. Sometimes, he'd make perverted sexual threats. Sometimes he'd be clearly jerking off, and sometimes he'd say nothing at all. He always called from a private number. Generally, as soon as I realized it was him, I would hang up the phone and go about my business. It wasn't until the third or the fourth phone call that it dawned on me he wasn't harassing me from the comfort of his own home. He always seemed to know what I was wearing. The green dress, those black boots, your ponytail. He was watching me. He was calling when I was working alone, or when I was the only person behind the desk to get to the phone. My co-workers confirmed that no one was calling for me when I was off duty. He could see me. During the epiphany phone call, I looked around the store. There were a few men in the store, but none of them were on their cell phone. I looked out the big front windows of the store into the mall. Plenty of people were mining about out there, but no one seemed suspicious. I had a creepy feeling that stuck with me for the rest of the day after that. I was only 21 or so at the time, and pretty naive. I had grown up in a very sheltered upper middle class bubble. Aside from an errant catcall or the occasional creeper at the bar, nothing like this had ever happened to me. I didn't know what to do. After a few hours of being unable to shake off my feeling of unease, I called more security to tell them what was going on. They said there wasn't much they could do, but offered to have someone walk me to my car after my shift. The officer they sent up to the store was hardly bigger than my 5'7", 115-pound frame, and he was armed with a flashlight. I politely declined the escort. I don't know why, but after a short series of increasingly threatening or disturbing phone calls, one day Mark just stopped calling. I had taken a few precautions in that time. I made sure I scheduled a male co-worker to open the store with me, and always walked to my car with another person at the end of the day. I don't know what happened to Mark. Maybe he found a different target. Maybe he dropped dead. It actually creeps me out even more now than it did back then. How did he find out my name? Was he coming into the store, or just watching from outside? Did I ever interact with him in person? Retrospectively, I was really dumb for thinking that a person who was stalking me over the phone, and who had already located himself very near to me, wouldn't take it any further than making phone calls.